No lobster bisque. Celeste's voice, calm, almost a purr, hid the viper coiling in her gut. The flight attendant's smile didn't reach her eyes. A mistake, please? In this seat? They thought she wouldn't notice the cheap sandwich they offered, while those pale faces behind her guzzled champagne. Big mistake. Celeste knew damn well what this was about. She'd felt it before, that subtle sting of otherness. But here's the thing. They had no clue who she was. No idea that this wasn't about a damn meal. Compassion, it turns out, can be a weapon. And the quiet understanding on her face? Pure dynamite. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. In that moment, Celeste knew it wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. The cold tone, the indifferent shrug, the way they handed her a cold sandwich and a glass of water, while other passengers around her dined on caviar and vintage champagne. None of it was by chance. She wasn't just another customer. She wasn't just another name on the flight list. She was the only black woman in the cabin, and she could feel it. This wasn't about the food anymore. This was about being pushed to the sidelines, underestimated, and quietly dismissed again. But Celeste Morgan wasn't the type to let it slide. What happened next didn't just shake Stratosphere. It forced an entire industry to take a long, hard look at itself. Stay tuned to see how a seemingly small act of prejudice sparked a storm that changed everything. Celeste Morgan boarded Stratus Air Flight 917 with an unmistakable air, poised, confident, and in complete control. She didn't need to prove anything. Her name had become legendary in the tech world. As the founding CEO of Morgan Tech, the company behind groundbreaking innovations in artificial intelligence and data security, Celeste had been named Global Influential Woman by Forbes for 3 consecutive years. This flight was taking her to Geneva, where she would finalize a multi-billion-dollar international deal. A deal that would not only expand Morgan Tech into Europe, but also mark the dawn of a new era in tech led by black women. Her perfectly tailored navy suit hugged her tall, elegant frame. Her shiny black leather shoes reflected the luxurious lights from the first-class lounge, and her curly hair was neatly styled in a bun at the back of her neck. Celeste appeared as a symphony of power and grace. No one could ignore her presence, not even those who were born into the privilege of first class. As she gently placed her Hermes handbag in the overhead compartment, a flight attendant approached and nodded politely, but his eyes only brushed over her as if by reflex, then immediately shifted toward a white male passenger who had just appeared behind her. Celeste smiled, saying nothing. She had long grown accustomed to the invisibility the world often reserved for people like her, and she knew those moments were always just the beginning of change. Seat 1A, the first position, the best view, and the spot that would set the stage for everything to come. Seat 1A enveloped Celeste in the quiet luxury of first class, where every stitch on the leather seat, every sparkling drop of champagne in a crystal glass, was designed to cater to those accustomed to sitting at the top of the world. But for Celeste, the summit of the world wasn't a place given to her. It was one she had to fight for, each rung, each breath to climb. As with every flight before this one, with Stratus Air, she had pre-ordered the lobster bisque to start, followed by a perfectly cooked prime steak paired with a special vintage Chateau Margaux red wine. Not because she sought to flaunt it, but because that meal had long been her way of affirming her place here. A black woman among a class usually dominated by white suits, condescending gazes, and symbolic handshakes. Celeste opened her tablet, her fingers gliding over the touchscreen. On it was the merger contract between Morgan Tech and a Swiss data security conglomerate. This deal wasn't just about market expansion. It was a strategic play in the global competition she had been plotting for over 2 years. She didn't need to look at the menu. Everything had been arranged in advance. And for a VIP like her, that was always guaranteed. Footsteps echoed softly behind her, measured, sharp. A female voice rang out, gentle enough to send a shiver down her spine. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Becky, and I'll be serving you during this flight." Celeste looked up, meeting the hard, pale face of the attendant. Becky Whitmore, blonde hair neatly tied at the nape, a smile proper but insincere, and eyes that didn't bother to mask the cold judgment scanning her from head to toe, right down to the thin gold ring on Celeste's left hand. I believe you received my reservation from last week, Celeste said softly, but firmly enough to make anyone underestimating her hesitate. Becky blinked, then gave a slight chuckle, tilting her head as if acknowledging her. Yes, of course, we'll serve you as soon as the plane is stable. She turned away, but not before leaving behind a barely perceptible sneer. Celeste furrowed her brow. There was something in Becky's voice and footsteps that felt familiar. Not because she knew this woman, but because she had encountered too many like her. The ones who were overly polite, yet always believed power came in only one skin color. Another attendant, a man named Daniel, passed by, bowing his head to greet 3 white passengers behind her, calling them by name. Good afternoon, Mr. Radcliffe, Mr. Malcolm, and Mr. Clayton. It's a pleasure to serve you today. Laughter rose lightly from behind, the clinking of glasses. A deep voice spoke up. Well, having caviar before takeoff like this flight's already promising. Celeste didn't turn her head. She didn't need to. But the chill running down her spine told her something. It had been a long time since she had so clearly seen the invisible line between first class and belonging. She lowered her tablet, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest. Each soft tap was like the beat of an alarm for something soon to happen. And she knew if Becky thought a meal could define who was important, this woman in seat 1A would show her exactly how wrong she was about that. Celeste Morgan gently looked up from her screen as the sound of high heels tapping lightly on the carpeted floor reached her ears. Becky Whitmore, the familiar face, with just enough makeup to appear polished but not enough to conceal her lack of goodwill, stopped beside seat 1A, holding a food tray that wasn't even covered. I'm sorry, ma'am, but we've run out of premium meals. We only have cold chicken sandwiches and water, Becky said, her tone devoid of any regret. Celeste narrowed her eyes and turned fully to face the attendant. I pre-ordered last week. There's an email confirmation, booking reference, and even reminder text from Stratus, she replied calmly, but with authority. Becky shrugged, the small notepad in her hand flapping loosely as if it were unimportant. Maybe the system wasn't updated. It happens all the time. She turned and walked away without a single apology, not even a glance back. In that moment, within the luxurious surroundings of first class, Celeste could no longer hear the murmurs of conversation, nor could she see the soft yellow light reflecting off the wine glasses of the other passengers. Everything faded. There was only a heavy silence and the cold sandwich, which felt like a slap denying her presence. She watched Becky's back as she walked away, the straight posture, the firm steps. That wasn't the demeanor of someone who had made a mistake. It was willful indifference, the calm apathy of someone who believed Celeste wouldn't dare speak up, and worse yet, someone who believed she didn't deserve to be treated the same as the others. Celeste's gaze swept across the cabin. The white men behind her continued to sip their champagne, chatting about the Asian market, crypto, stock strategies. No one noticed anything unusual, or rather they were too accustomed to seeing people like her being forgotten. Another attendant, Daniel Clean, walked by and politely stopped to greet the passengers in seats 1C and 1D. It's a pleasure to serve you, Mr. Radcliffe, Mr. Malcolm, and Mr. Clayton on this flight today. Once again, caviar, hot towels, and champagne refills. No one said a word to Celeste. No one asked if she needed anything. No one seemed to care that she, the only black woman in the cabin, was sitting with a tray of food that felt like economy class. Abandoned in a world where she should have earned her place through intelligence, hard work, and resilience. But Celeste Morgan was not the kind of woman to be pushed aside. She didn't say anything. She didn't get angry. But beneath her calm exterior, a quiet storm had begun to rise. A storm that Becky Whitmore, with all her fake politeness and dismissive glare, had no idea she had just sparked. A storm that would sweep away Stratus's entire service culture. The faded silver tray placed before Celeste was a stark symbol of rejection. The cold chicken sandwich nestled between 2 thin slices of bread, wilted lettuce, a cheap napkin, and a half-filled glass of water. No silver cutlery, no cloth-lined tray, no indication that this was a meal for a first-class passenger. Worse still, it wasn't meant for a female CEO invited to speak at the European Economic Forum. Celeste sat up straight, her hands clasped together on her knees. She didn't touch the tray, not out of pride, but because she needed to fully absorb the insult. She didn't avoid it. She didn't forget it. She needed to remember every detail, every moment, every look from Becky, every chuckle from the rows behind her, and the silence of the bystanders. 6 white men, 6 custom-tailored suits, 6 glasses of champagne raised in unison under the soft light of the cabin. And not one of them, not a single glance was directed at Celeste. No one asked why the only black woman in the cabin was holding a tray of food as if she had stepped into a world not meant for her. But she knew. She recalled the first time she walked into the boardroom of Sterling Capital. It was when she was 33, invited to present the first AI security platform she had developed herself. She arrived early, fully prepared, dressed smartly and confident. But when she entered, a white man in the boardroom didn't look her in the eye. Instead, he spoke to the secretary. "Could you bring me a coffee?" Celeste wasn't angry. She simply smiled and replied, "I'll bring it if you agree to let me present the $15 million security plan right afterward." The room fell silent, and from that moment, she was never mistaken for anyone else but herself. But not everyone learns that lesson. Becky Whitmore, an archetype of a generation pampered by social status, who never had to fight for a place, never had to face rejection for something as arbitrary as the color of their skin. She may not shout racist words or use crude language, but the way she shrugged, the way she didn't bother to apologize, the way she walked away without a second glance, this was the language of modern discrimination. Cold, quiet, but cutting through everything. Celeste shifted her gaze from the tray of food and scanned the cabin. Seat 1, C. Radcliffe, CEO of a venture capital firm known for investing in startups founded by Ivy League alumni. He had rejected Morgan Tech early on, citing lack of senior leadership experience. Seat 1, D. Malcolm, a strategic analyst at a large insurance fund who once questioned at a seminar whether black women are capable of handling high-tech industries. Seat 2, A. Clayton, founder of a financial trading platform, once accused of harassing a black female employee, but never officially investigated. All 3 were being served Michelin standard dinners, and she was not. Celeste closed her eyes. Inside her, it wasn't mere anger anymore. It was a deep, lingering fatigue, the feeling of someone who had reached the summit of the mountain, but was still being pulled back by the invisible rope of bias. But today, she wasn't just climbing the mountain. She was going to break it down. No noise, no chaos, but in her own way, decisive, precise, and irreversible. She opened her phone, opened Morgan Tech's internal security management app where real-time data tracking tools were integrated. With just a few taps, she accessed the staff profile identified through the airline's first-class booking system. Name, Rebecca Ann Whitmore. Position, Senior Cabin Crew, Stratus Air. Internal ID ST A9035. Initial data popped up there. She saw a profile with several cracks, 2 passenger complaints about service discrimination, an internal email with the comment, "Focus on serving passengers who give better tips." No direct evidence of racism, but the language implied that she categorized customers. Celeste saved everything. Then she sent an encrypted message to Aaliyah Grant, her executive assistant. "Activate emergency audit protocol, Flight 917, cabin crew ID ST A9035. Send confirmation within 10 minutes. Each word typed carried no emotion, but behind it was a deadly seriousness, not just for Becky, but for the entire system that had allowed Becky's to exist. She turned off the screen. Her eyes no longer lingered on the food tray. She looked straight ahead where a small light from the cockpit illuminated a narrow strip signaling a long runway opening up ahead. This was no longer about a meal, not about unprofessional behavior. This was a declaration. Under the dim lighting of first class, Celeste closed her eyes. But her mind did not. It spun like a giant gear just restarted. Each image, each word, each dismissive glance from the past flooding back like a wave. No noise but intense. She saw herself at 26 in her first pitch meeting in Palo Alto. In the small room, there were 7 white men, all wearing tucked-in shirts and carrying MacBooks. She stood among them with a prototype of AI security far ahead of its time. But the first thing they asked was, Do you do tech, or are you the co-founder for marketing? She remembered that feeling clearly. The feeling of stepping into a casino where every card had already been dealt, and the chair she was given was the one left over when no one cared. But she didn't back down. She didn't retreat. And in the end, her model was the one the Pentagon ordered 3 years later. She saw herself at 34 at a tech conference in London when a journalist asked, "As the first Black woman to make the top 10 CEOs under 40, do you think your success is due to luck or gender equality policies?" Celeste looked him straight in the eye, smiling like a knife drawn from its sheath. "I think success comes when you work 3 times harder than everyone else, are doubted 10 times more, and keep moving forward as if no one can stop you." The lights on the plane gently changed from yellow to a soft blue. The pilot announced they were flying over Canadian airspace, 8 hours from Geneva. A ding rang, signaling that the main meal service had begun. A new attendant, Daniel Clean, began moving between the rows. Celeste opened her eyes, still sitting in place, her gaze fixed out the window. Outside, the endless night stretched on, but inside her, another battle was being prepared. A battle that didn't need gunshots but could shake an entire system. At the heart of that battle was Becky. Becky Whitmore was not a clear villain. No extreme behavior, no openly racist remarks, no blatant insults. But that was the danger. She carried within her a discrimination that had been legitimized into professional demeanor, masked by a fake smile and insincere apologies. And the most telling part, the system had allowed it to continue. It had allowed someone like Becky to rise to senior cabin crew without being stopped, without warning, without oversight, because people like Celeste, too busy surviving, didn't speak up. Celeste knew well. There was a kind of discrimination that never shouts down office hallways. It quietly pushes you off the priority list. It calls you guest, but never by your name like the others. It forgets your pre-ordered meal, but never forgets a white man's meal next to you. And that's why today she wouldn't stay silent. She tapped lightly on her smartwatch. A safety signal was sent to Aaliyah Grant. Status confirmation. Check flight attendant ST A9035 background. Validate behavior per International Airline Services Alliance protocol. 3 minutes later, the screen displayed a message. Full profile accessed. 2 customer complaints within 12 months. 1 internal transfer for unprofessional behavior. No formal disciplinary action taken. Celeste nodded slightly. Once again, the system chose silence. But this time she was going to make the system speak the truth. When Daniel Clean approached the row of seats, she signaled for him to stop with a subtle hand gesture. "I have a question, Mr. Clean," she said, her voice light, but each word like a cold needle piercing through the fine fabric of the airline's reputation. Daniel leaned slightly forward. "Yes, Miss Morgan. I'd like to know, according to Stratus's internal policy, when passengers pre-order premium meals, what criteria are prioritized when there is a shortage of supply?" Daniel hesitated. "Usually it's based on the order time and flight frequency. I'm a Diamond Plus member." "Ordered my meal 7 days ago and received confirmation from the system," she said, her eyes never leaving him. "I understand." Daniel awkwardly looked around, avoiding Celeste's gaze. It could be a system issue or temporary priority from the crew." Celeste said nothing more. She smiled politely, then turned her face away. She had enough. And now in the softly lit first-class cabin, while others thought this was just a regular flight, Celeste Morgan was rewriting history, not with a speech, not with a camera, but with evidence, action, and a resolve that no one could break. Not angry, not questioning, no need for loudness or outrage to assert her presence. Celeste Morgan had long learned that true power didn't lie in volume, but in action. Actions that were timely, precise, and irreversible. She opened her phone, her finger lightly swiping across the touchscreen as if sending a simple message to a friend. But what she typed, short and decisive, was an order that would kick off an internal investigation capable of shaking the entire system. Activate internal audit procedure. Flight 917, crew records required. Confirm. Just 6 lines. 6 lines that could end anyone's career. 6 lines that would force Stratus's board of directors to sit down, not to discuss service or marketing, but to confront the truth they had avoided for years. Aaliyah Grant, Celeste's senior executive assistant, was trained not only to manage tasks, but also to handle crisis truly at the corporate security level. And when she received this message, Aaliyah didn't ask, "What happened?" or "Are you okay?" She responded in the true Morgan Tech style, "Received. Data retrieval in progress." Celeste tucked her phone into her jacket pocket. No words, no expression. Meanwhile, across the ocean, an entire chain of servers had been awakened. Passenger data, service logs, Stratus Air employee records were being accessed, filtered, and verified against the standards of one of the highest level security systems globally. In the first-class cabin, no one knew what was happening. The laughter continued behind her. Radcliffe and Malcolm were debating European digital currency, while Clayton was on his third glass of champagne. Becky Whitmore was still circulating between the rows with her professional fake smile, continuously asking the gentlemen if they needed more hot towels. But she never looked back at Celeste because in her mind, Celeste had already been classified unimportant. Celeste remained still, but her ears caught every detail. She noticed the way Becky smiled brightly when asking Mr. Malcolm, "Would you like to try the company's chocolate mousse?" The way she bent lower than usual when pouring wine for Mr. Radcliffe. The way she gently touched Mr. Clayton's hand when offering a toast. It was all selective, and it all pointed toward a certain type of customer, not her. 12 minutes after the first message, Celeste's watch vibrated lightly. An encrypted message was sent, accompanied by a large PDF file and 2 internal links. She opened the file, her eyes scanning the first line. Flight attendant behavior record, Rebecca Ann Whitmore, IDST 9035. Beneath it, quiet but sharp notes. May 2023, VIP passenger complaint about being served the wrong meal 3 times consecutively. Signs of favoritism toward guests of the same class. August 2023, internal report on unprofessional comments in the crew break room. November 2023, crew operations requested temporary suspension due to behavioral factors affecting service reputation. All incidents ended with one brief note. No formal disciplinary action taken. Celeste clenched her right fist, but her face remained calm. Not a hint of anger showed on her lips or eyes, just a cold confirmation she was right and they were wrong. And worse still, they had let it continue. Becky was not just a flawed individual. She was the product of a culture that had long rationalized discrimination by excuses like overload, system error, or insufficient grounds for action. It was this culture that had created people like Becky, and today it would have to face the consequences. Celeste scrolled down the screen, switching to another attached file. This was a list of all crew members on Flight 917. She marked 3 names with high-frequency complaints, including Becky. Then she extracted a section of Stratus's internal policy. Any discriminatory or biased behavior in service, even without direct verbal evidence, if corroborated by repeated actions, will be dealt with according to industry ethical standards. She smiled not because of triumph, but because she knew today her silence was no longer weakness. It was power. She pressed the send button to send the summary report with an investigation request to the CEO of Stratus Air, while CCing 3 legal advisors she had previously worked with on discrimination lawsuits. No calls needed, no press conferences, no social media, just one line. Request internal investigation into Flight 917 crew. Urgent. Then she folded her phone, closed her eyes, and leaned her head back against the soft leather seat. The sky outside remained calm, but under those clouds a storm was forming, and Celeste Morgan was the eye of the storm. As Celeste Morgan rested her head against the soft leather seat of 1A, her eyes half closed under the gentle cabin lights halfway around the world. Another woman was shaking the foundation of the home front with a data processing speed that would make any cybersecurity expert take notice. Aaliyah Grant, 29 years old, Celeste's senior executive assistant, sat in her office on the 42nd floor of Morgan Tech Tower in Manhattan. Her frizzy hair was pulled back into a tight bun, a habit she followed whenever entering a state of absolute focus. The room was now only lit by the glow of the LED screen, reflecting off her thick glasses and the rhythmic tapping of the keyboard like the heartbeat of a data pursuit reaching its climax. Celeste didn't need to say much. She didn't need to elaborate. Just a text with the right keywords was enough for Aya to understand the gravity of the situation, because between them trust wasn't in the quantity of words, it was in the accuracy of each action. Aaliyah opened the internal analytics dashboard, accessing the security API linked to aviation industry data and partner documents from international airlines. A stream of code appeared, and in less than 90 seconds, the first piece of information surfaced. Rebecca Ann Whitmore, senior cabin crew, Stratus Air ID ST9035. Joined 2018 role confirmed on Flight 917. The data seemed ordinary, but Aaliyah didn't stop there. She opened additional customer feedback files, analyzing the history of complaints from flights involving Becky over the past 3 years. And then the suspicious pieces began to surface. February 2022, a black first-class passenger was denied their pre-ordered wine with no clear reason given. September 2022, 2 Asian passengers reported being served after all other passengers, despite boarding earlier. March 2023, an Indian female entrepreneur was ignored after pressing the call button 3 times on Flight 803. None of these reports led to any disciplinary action. The system recorded the familiar excuse: insufficient evidence to process violation. Aaliyah furrowed her brow. She knew too well how these kinds of records were blurred. People like Becky knew how to maneuver around the boundaries of the rules. No shouting, no direct insults. She simply didn't engage with those she didn't deem worthy. And the system had allowed her to exist this way for nearly 6 years. Aaliyah opened the internal cross-referencing tool with Morgan Tech's behavioral recognition system, an exclusive tool developed by herself and Celeste designed to analyze bias patterns from tone, facial expressions, response times, and interaction levels with different customer groups. The results made her smirk, not a smile, but a reflex of professional disdain. Bias Interaction Index, 87.4% repeated bias behavior towards non-white customers. 15 times 36 flights recorded. Warning: high organizational culture risk. Recommend deeper investigation. Aaliyah marked all the data points, created a PDF report with encrypted validation, and linked it to the internal evidence library. She sent the report to the command-level review inbox, the channel reserved for serious cases affecting strategic partners or brand reputation. She attached a note: Systemic Discriminatory Behavior Flight 917 crew, sent per Celeste Morgan's request, activate organizational culture investigation. At the same time, Aaliyah sent copies to 3 senior executives at Stratus Air, including CEO Charles Edmonds, a former ally of Morgan Tech in technology collaborations. She knew Edmonds wouldn't ignore anything from Celeste, not only because of respect, but because he understood. When Celeste Morgan decided to take action, it wasn't for retaliation. It was because the system needed to change. Less than 5 minutes later, Aaliyah's screen lit up with a confirmation notification. Investigation order has been issued. HR and legal team will be at the destination to conduct immediate evaluation. Thank you for bringing this to light. Aaliyah exhaled, pushing her chair back and resting her hands behind her head. She didn't feel relief. She knew this was just the beginning. Throughout her career by Celeste's side, she had seen her CEO defeat giant banks, ruthless investment firms, and slippery politicians. But she had never seen Celeste send an audit now signal without a very justifiable reason. The clock struck 2:00 a.m. in New York. On board Flight 917 in Seat 1A, Celeste was still awake, but Becky Whitmore was still smiling in Seat 2C, unaware that from this moment on, everything around her was beginning to collapse. Celeste nodded slightly, her gaze as cold as steel, but her voice remained the calm tone of a leader who was all too familiar with confronting decaying systems. There was no need to make a scene in midair. She knew everything necessary had already been sent. Now every word she spoke was just to reaffirm there was no escape for the other side. She pressed the call button. A soft ting rang out, so quiet that no one noticed, but enough for a middle-aged attendant with a lean frame and neatly combed salt and pepper hair to approach. Daniel Clean, according to the name tag on his chest, his steps hesitated slightly as he neared Seat 1A. His eyes briefly wary, as if his instincts had warned him that this woman was unlike the usual passengers. "I'd like to ask again about the pre-ordered meal," Celeste said, her voice low and steady, but carrying the pressure of someone who wouldn't accept an easy answer. Daniel stood straight, his hand lightly resting on the serving tray. "Yes, ma'am." Celeste cut him off, not raising her voice, but it was sharp like a slice. I heard Miss Whitmore talk about prioritizing passengers. What did she mean by that? Daniel was speechless. His eyes scanned around as though searching for an escape from what seemed like an innocuous question, but he understood. This wasn't a question about the meal. This was a language trap, a statement that would be remembered and could potentially be used before an investigative panel. I think that was a communication misunderstanding, he stammered. We don't have a policy of discrimination. We just take into account some factors like order timing and food availability. Celeste tilted her head, her eyes as sharp as a razor. I'm a Diamond Plus member. Ordered my meal 7 days ago with email confirmation and a booking reference. In this cabin, I'm the only one not served a premium meal, yet Ms. Whitmore talks about prioritizing guests. If it's not discrimination, then what is it? Daniel went silent. A bead of sweat formed on his temple, even though the cabin was cool. He wasn't foolish enough to outright deny it, but he wasn't brave enough to face it head-on. Celeste smiled, an apple-slicing grin, sharp and deliberate. No need to answer. I understand now. He lowered his head slightly and turned to walk away, his steps quicker than usual, like a fox escaping the spotlight of an interrogation. But he didn't know. Celeste didn't need his answer to use as evidence. She already had everything she needed. She opened her smartwatch again, glancing over the update from Aaliyah. Investigation order approved by Stratus CEO. HR and legal team will be at Geneva upon landing. Command code Redline 917. Redline 917, an internal code for incidents that could harm brand reputation at the strategic level. By protocol, this meant the entire crew would be monitored as soon as they left the cabin. All cabin recordings for the flight would be stored and reviewed. An emergency meeting would be held immediately upon landing with HR, legal, and regional managers. Individuals involved would be temporarily suspended from service within 24 hours. And Celeste knew after she hit send on the first report, everything was set in motion like a domino chain that no one could stop. In the back cabin, Becky was still chatting with Mr. Radcliffe. Each step she took between the rows was an unconscious act of providing more evidence for customer discrimination. She didn't know that her behavior, interactions, and even tone of voice were being recorded by the AI system from the cabin cameras, which Morgan Tech had temporary access to from its partner to protect the interests of VIP passengers. Celeste exhaled lightly but not softly. This was why she hadn't confronted Becky when she was humiliated. She didn't need a confrontation. She needed the collapse. On her tablet, she opened her own profile in the Stratus Air Partner system. Everything checked out. Diamond Plus member for 10 consecutive years. Average of 12 first-class flights per year. One of 50 VIP customers invited to provide the service feedback last year. She marked everything. A complete, logical, airtight set. No emotions, no gaps. Celeste wasn't acting out of personal pride. She knew if she didn't respond, Becky would continue to exist. And people like her, Black women, founders, entrepreneurs, would always be the ones who are forgotten. She couldn't allow that to happen again. Not when she was sitting in seat 1A, a seat she had earned through youth, through years of rejection, being sidelined, and finally winning it back with her talent and unwavering resolve. The plane gently shook as the pilot announced they were preparing to descend. Becky passed by again. Her eyes slid over Celeste, still indifferent. Still the way she looked through others without stopping. Still the silent contempt that Celeste had become all too familiar with throughout her career. But this time that silence would be forced to speak. As the plane touched down, the screeching sound of the tires against the runway resonated through the cabin like a silent signal. Everything from this moment on would be different. Celeste Morgan opened her eyes as she felt the plane descending, her head tilting slightly as if measuring the movement of the air. But in reality, she was listening. Listening for the small sounds that only those who had survived billion-dollar negotiations could discern. The squeal of the wheels, the soft sigh of relief from the passengers, the hurried footsteps of the crew. She didn't rush to unbuckle her seatbelt. Her smartwatch had vibrated twice in less than a minute, notifying her that every link in the chain was ready. Aaliyah had completed sending the full behavioral analysis report, including cabin video footage showing Becky's selective favoritism, the service time discrepancies between passengers, and images from passengers who had secretly recorded Becky refusing Celeste's meal order. The final message had been sent no more than 3 minutes before the plane touched down. It contained just one line: transfer file to Service Ethics Board, execute at urgent level. Code Geneva 1A. When the plane taxied down the runway and came to a stop, Celeste gently unbuckled her seatbelt. No rush, no expression. She stood up, adjusted the hem of her blazer, and placed her leather bag neatly over her left shoulder. She stepped into the aisle, her steps firm but unhurried. Behind her, the passengers were still rummaging through their luggage, chatting and waiting. At the plane door, 2 people in dark suits were waiting. One was Brandon Ellis, the regional CEO for Europe at Stratus Air. The other was a petite woman with sharp eyes wearing a name tag that read, Legal Affairs Geneva Division. Both bowed their heads as Celeste stepped out of the cabin. Welcome, Miss Morgan. We sincerely apologize for Celeste didn't stop walking. She merely glanced at them, then said loud enough to be heard, No need to apologize. This is just the beginning. She said, no more. No handshake, no looking back. But right behind her, both Brandon and the legal representatives straightened up, their expressions changing. They had read the report. They knew exactly what awaited them behind that business class welcome door. And they knew this mistake by the airline was not just a service incident, it was a cultural flaw, and now they were paying the price. At the same time, the cabin crew began to exit the plane via the rear exit as usual. Becky Whitmore walked with the group, still wearing her composed face, believing that everything was fine, that tonight she would be at her usual hotel, ordering her favorite martini and telling her friends about a troublesome passenger on Flight 917. She didn't know that at the end of the exit lane, 3 people in black suits from the HR and crisis coordination team were standing waiting. And as Becky approached, she saw one of them raise a tablet displaying the message. Flight 917 crew, please proceed to the emergency meeting room. Becky's face froze for a moment. Her eyes darted around trying to find any sign of confusion. But the gaze of her colleague, Daniel Clean, was equally silent, unwavering. No one said anything. No one was laughing anymore. The tremor had begun, and she was at the epicenter. Celeste walked through the Geneva airport lobby, where VIP staff were ready to escort her to the conference delegation's hotel. Her phone vibrated lightly. A message from Aaliyah. They've started gathering testimony. Whitmore has been suspended from service. The matter will be presented in the board meeting tomorrow morning. She didn't reply right away. She stepped into the waiting black limousine. As the door closed, the light outside was completely cut off. Celeste leaned back into the soft leather seat, her eyes fixed ahead. She knew what happened today was not just about her. It was a milestone, a wordless declaration, but stronger than any speech. This was no longer a reaction. This was a cleansing. As Celeste's limousine disappeared from the airport gates, a series of red-flagged emails with the subject line, Urgent Incident Flight 917. Immediate board review required simultaneously appeared on the screens of the Stratus Air leadership at their headquarters in Geneva. An emergency meeting was called within 30 minutes. All regional executives, legal advisors, customer service directors, and the head of the cabin crew management department were required to attend. The meeting notice came with a brief appendix. Complainant Celeste Morgan, CEO Morgan Tech. The moment that name appeared, the atmosphere in the conference room seemed to thicken. Celeste Morgan. Not just a CEO, not just a VIP customer, but someone who stood at the forefront of a series of global reforms regarding digital equity and fairness in high-end service industries. A woman once listed by Time as one of the people changing corporate culture in the 21st century, and now she was at the center of an incident that Stratus's system had allowed to occur right in seat 1A. Charles Edmonds, the current CEO of Stratus, known for his reformist thinking and commitment to transparency, sat quietly at the head of the table. In front of him was a thick printout of 23 pages. Behavioral Discrimination Report on Flight 917. Emergency Situation under the Global Service Ethics Code. All eyes turned to the screen as Aaliyah Grant, invited by Morgan Tech, joined the meeting through a secure system from New York. I won't be long, Aaliyah began, her eyes locked directly on the camera, her voice sharp but not angry. We're not looking for an apology. Morgan Tech doesn't need empty promises. We need action. We need confirmation that your system does not tolerate subtle discriminatory behavior. No excuses, no avoidance. She paused, scanning the expressions of several people in the room. Then she projected a video clip from the passenger cabin camera. Becky Whitmore holding a tray, responding to Celeste with a tone that lacked any respect. Maybe it didn't go into the system. Happens all the time. Next came a table comparing service times between first-class passengers. White passengers. Average response time, 42 seconds. Celeste Morgan, 6 minutes 11 seconds. Meal rejected without reason. A seasoned service advisor furrowed his brow and turned to Edmonds. We can't cover this up. We won't, Edmonds replied firmly. Not because he was pressured by Celeste's name, but because he realized this was no longer a personal issue. The service system that Stratus had once prided itself on, service for the elite, was now exposed in an entirely different light, a service structure where elite was defined not by achievements, but by race, gender, and outdated societal norms. And the woman sitting in seat 1A was the one who had drawn the line on that mistake. As Aaliyah ended her call, Edmund stood up, tapping his hand on the table once. From this moment forward, all members of the Flight 917 crew are suspended. An investigation will be extended to all flights involving flight attendant Rebecca Whitmore in the past 24 months. He paused, looking at each person. We will issue a public apology to Miss Morgan. And not just that, we will invite her to join as a cultural advisor for the entire crew training system at Stratus. A regional director raised an eyebrow. You plan to have her rewrite our policies? Edmonds nodded without hesitation. Not let we need her to rewrite them. An unprecedented decision. But at this moment, no one was thinking about old policies because everyone knew if they didn't act, the Stratus brand would be forever linked to this scandal as a stain on their high-end silk. In Geneva, Celeste sat in her hotel room overlooking Lake Lima. On the table in front of her was a steaming cup of herbal tea, and an email had just been opened. We sincerely apologize for what occurred. A comprehensive investigation has been initiated. We would be honored to invite you to join our Cultural Reform Advisory Team. This is not only an honor, but a responsibility we believe only you can undertake. Charles Edmonds, CEO, Stratus Air. Celeste didn't smile. She lightly tapped her fingers on the table. 3 sharp taps, her eyes fixed on the lake. Quietly enough to understand that the earthquake she started from a cold sandwich tray had now caused an entire industry to take a hard look at itself. The cabin crew of Flight 917 stepped off the plane with their usual demeanor, relaxed, relieved after a long journey. Becky Whitmore led the group as usual, her high heels tapping lightly against the terminal floor, her blonde hair still neatly tied up, and a smile on her face that looked more like a mask worn too long to distinguish the real from the fake. For Becky, the flight had been nothing special, a minor issue with a difficult passenger, just like the dozens of times before. In her mind, Celeste Morgan was simply an overly sensitive businesswoman who overreacted because she didn't get her seafood soup or steak. Making a fuss over a sandwich tray. What a drag, Becky thought to herself. But as they passed through the door leading to the crew exit, no one in the group was smiling anymore. It wasn't a red carpet waiting for them. It was a line of people standing in wait. 3 men in black suits from the Internal Security Department, 2 senior HR personnel in Stratus Air uniforms, but with red name tags signifying they were from the Emergency Internal Investigation Team. A lawyer holding an iPad with the company logo and a thick confidential file stamped with confidential ethics review. No one in the crew said a word. The solemn atmosphere, the bright white light shining down onto the marble floor, made it feel more like standing in a courtroom than an airport hallway. The woman standing in the center of the group, Karen Dufresne, head of global service culture at Stratus, stepped forward, her voice not loud, but as sharp as a freshly honed blade. Please, the Flight 917 crew, proceed to Emergency Interview Room 2. This is a mandatory meeting in accordance with Article 6.3 of the Global Service Ethics Code. A male flight attendant behind Becky glanced at her, his eyes confused. But Becky stood still. She opened her mouth, probably to ask, "What's going on?" But Karen's gaze made her swallow her words. The list was ready. The files were locked. They were no longer flight attendants finishing their shifts. They were individuals being investigated for serious violations of professional ethics. They were led down a narrow hallway with 6 separate rooms. Each person had a room to themselves. No phones were allowed, no assistants present. Each room had a camera recording, a senior staff member, and a lawyer observing. Becky sat in the chair, her back straight, trying to stay calm, but inside she could feel the turmoil beginning. The woman sitting opposite her opened a file, her eyes never leaving the lines. "Ms. Whitmore, we will ask you a few questions based on your service data for Flight 917, as well as prior flights in the past 24 months. This interview is being recorded and may be used as evidence in internal disciplinary procedures, including immediate dismissal if any violations are substantiated." Becky swallowed hard. Her lips felt dry. The investigator opened the tablet, a video played. It was the moment she had told Celeste Morgan. Maybe it didn't go into the system. Happens all the time. Celeste's gaze in the video wasn't angry. It was unnervingly calm. "Do you remember this situation?" "Yeah, can you explain why 5 other passengers received their pre-ordered meals, but the guest in 1A did not?" "I think maybe the system malfunctioned. We've checked. The system confirmed the order from 7 days ago, and internal confirmation at boarding. Would you like to add anything?" Becky could no longer respond. Her eyes began to panic. She was facing something she never thought would happen to her: the real consequences. Every time she denied a meal, every shrug, every unkind word had been recorded, not on paper, but through behavior, through eyes, through cameras, through the countless invisible gazes that had grown tired of enduring. And this time, the person in 1A wasn't silent like the others before. At Stratus Geneva headquarters, Charles Edmonds sat alone in meeting room 1. On the table in front of him were 3 reports just submitted from the preliminary investigation team. Each had a brief title: Rebecca Whitmore, Proposal for Indefinite Suspension; Systemic Bias, Proposal for Comprehensive Training Reform; Official Proposal, Appoint Celeste Morgan as Independent Advisor for Diversity and a Service Culture. ... Edmonds didn't need to read them again. He knew an era at Stratus had come to an end. Not because the media uncovered it, not because customers were outraged, but because a woman stepped off from seat 1A with the calm of someone who understands that justice doesn't need to shout to be heard. That very afternoon, an internal memo was sent to all Stratus employees across international branches. The subject line was bolded and tagged, "Urgency, priority response required. Immediate suspension of employee Becky Whitmore, initiating comprehensive training system reform." The document was personally signed by CEO Charles Edmonds, accompanied by a rare direct statement from a luxury airline. "We acknowledge that certain subtle discriminatory behaviors have been overlooked within our internal system. This is the moment Stratus Air must take responsibility and, more importantly, change." At the HR office in Geneva, Becky Whitmore sat with her head down, still clutching her personal report. Her face was pale, not because of the suspension, but because she was realizing that everything she had once thought of as the norm had now become evidence. And worse, everything had already been documented. Emails that had previously seemed like casual office banter were now being analyzed in depth by the language monitoring system. "Those black passengers act like they're CEOs. People of color often need attention. I deal with them lightly just to get it over with. Met a Michelle Obama wannabe today. Bread and water is enough." In the past, these lines had passed through the inbox like any other hallway gossip. But now, from a legal and organizational culture standpoint, they had become irrefutable evidence of a covert system of discrimination, a system that didn't use loud words, but the shrug of a shoulder and a glance of disrespect. It wasn't just Becky. 2 other members of the crew, including Daniel Clean, who had avoided answering Celeste, were also placed under behavioral surveillance. Their previous flights, the silent complaints from minority passengers, the times they forgot to serve or accidentally didn't respond to the call button. All were being revisited. Beyond the confines of the airline, the seismic shock was already spreading. Less than 24 hours after the incident, major news outlets began reporting. The New York Times, "Black CEO discriminated against on plane. Power is no longer silent." The Guardian, "One denied meal, and the entire luxury service system is exposed." Forbes, Celeste Morgan, From victim to leading the global service culture reform. In a 3-page feature on the Washington Post's social equality section, the video clip of Celeste speaking just one line in the cabin was shared millions of times. I understand now. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a retaliatory blow. It was a statement that she had seen it all, and she wouldn't let it happen again. Shortly after, a social media campaign called Seat 1A began to spread. Thousands of people shared their stories. Times they had been pushed aside, ignored, treated as invisible because of their skin color, gender, or background. And at the end of each post, there was one line: "Because I don't sit in seat 1A, but I deserve respect." Stratus's New York office received over 9,000 emails requesting cultural reform. The London External Relations Department received documents from 3 major investors demanding an internal seminar on diversity, and CEO Edmunds received a call from the U.S. Secretary of Transportation requesting an official report on the state of corporate culture in the luxury airline industry. Celeste didn't need to appear at any press conferences. She didn't need to fight for the right to speak. Her actions had become the voice. At her hotel by Lake Geneva, Celeste sat alone in a small conference room, not with the press, but with 3 young women of color. She listened to them, those who worked in service, who had been overlooked, who had been deemed out of place, who once thought they couldn't stand up. "We want to learn how to speak up like you," one of them said. Celeste shook her head, her expression stern. "I don't speak up with words. I let the system speak its own truth, and I show it that this time it can't look away." Outside the window, the surface of Lake Lehman was still as glass. But deep within the water, the waves were quietly moving, just like the changes that had been set in motion from seat 1A on a flight Becky Whitmore would never forget. Celeste had never needed to shout, never lost control, never bent down to beg anyone to listen to her, because she understood true power doesn't need noise. It just needs to be timely. And this time, the right moment was a cold sandwich, a cold gaze, and a meal being denied. Not because of lack, but because the person sitting in seat 1A didn't fit the definition of worthy in the eyes of the server. She hadn't slapped, hadn't questioned, hadn't stood up in the first-class cabin to make a scene like so many people had advised her in workshops on how to protest. She simply nodded and said, "I understand now." And it was that calm that unraveled the true face of a system, one where luxury was not designed to serve, but to subtly exclude those deemed not belonging. Jokes like, "Black passengers always act like their CEOs that were once considered internal had now been made public. Service data that had been ignored was now displayed in charts. Emails that had sunk into archives were now evidence, all revealed by someone who hadn't raised her voice. 3 days after the incident, Stratus Air held a press conference in Geneva, attended by dozens of major media outlets. For the first time in the company's history, they invited a guest who wasn't from the leadership team to speak, Celeste Morgan. She stepped onto the stage in an ivory white suit. No glitter, no logo, just a small black bird-shaped pin on her collar, symbolizing the Seat 1A coalition she had founded with African female leaders to advocate for fairness in luxury services. There was no prepared speech, no media team standing behind her. She simply held the microphone and spoke with a steady, clear voice, each word like an arrow piercing through the veneer of grandeur. "I'm not here to be angry. I'm not here to be the typical victim. I'm here because there are people sitting in seat 34F, or the seats next to the bathroom, who are considered unworthy of attention just because of their skin color, their accent, or because they don't know how to call out the right wine on the menu." She looked directly at Stratus representatives but didn't criticize. She let the truth speak for itself. "I'm not asking for a meal. I'm asking for a system that doesn't exclude me simply because I don't look like the usual passengers in seat 1A. She spoke about Becky Whitmore, but didn't mention her name. She spoke about how flight attendants memorized the names of 3 white passengers, but only referred to her as the guest. She spoke about the feeling of being seen, but never truly acknowledged. Then she stopped. The lights on the ceiling suddenly shifted from cold white to a warm yellow tone. For a moment, no one moved. No further words were needed. After the press conference, a series of progressive changes began to unfold within Stratus. Mandatory training for 100% of flight attendants on unconscious bias and equity in luxury service. Creation of a direct feedback channel for VIP passengers with a rapid response team on organizational culture. Invitation to Celeste Morgan to serve as a strategic advisor for the Redefining Luxury program, a global initiative on fairness in luxury services. Becky Whitmore, once the unspoken symbol of proper service, now became the living example of a system that had been designed to operate smoothly on the silence of the disadvantaged. Bloomberg ran a headline on the front page. When Celeste didn't need to shout, a CEO changes the entire airline industry with one look. And beneath it was a small subtitle, and with just one line, I understand now. That night, Celeste declined every interview request. She turned down all major networks, including CNN and BBC. She didn't need to say more because everything that needed to be said had already been spoken by the system itself through its true nature. On the hotel balcony, she looked out at the still waters of Lake Lehman. A young assistant stepped out, ready to announce the positive feedback from Stratus's shareholders, but Celeste simply raised her hand to stop him. "I don't need feedback," she said. "I just need the system to never dare fall asleep again." And for her, that was the real victory. An internal memo from Stratus Air headquarters flashed in the inboxes of over 22,000 employees across global offices and airports. Immediate suspension of employee Becky Whitmore, initiating comprehensive service training reform. The document was personally signed by CEO Charles Edmonds and accompanied by a blunt statement rarely seen from a luxury airline. "We acknowledge that certain subtle discriminatory behaviors have been overlooked within our internal system. This is the moment Stratus must take responsibility and, more importantly, change." At Stratus HR office in Geneva, Becky Whitmore sat with her head lowered, still clutching her personal report. Her face was pale, not because of the suspension, but because she was realizing that everything she once thought was just the norm had now become evidence. And worse, everything had already been documented. Emails that had once seemed like casual office banter were now being analyzed meticulously by the language monitoring system. Black passengers act like their CEOs. People of color often need attention. I handle them lightly just to get it over with. Met a Michelle Obama wannabe today. Bread and water's enough. Previously, these lines had passed through the inbox like any other hallway gossip. But now, from a legal and organizational culture perspective, they had become irrefutable evidence of covert discrimination. A system where discrimination wasn't yelled out, but done with a shrug and a lack of respect. It wasn't just Becky. Two other members of the crew, including Daniel Clean, who had avoided answering Celeste, were also placed under behavioral surveillance. Their previous flights, the quiet complaints from minority passengers, the times they forgot to serve or accidentally didn't respond to call buttons, all were being revisited. Beyond the airline's internal walls, the seismic shock had already reached further. Less than 24 hours after the incident, major news outlets began covering the story. The New York Times, Black CEO discriminated against on plane. Power is no longer silent. The Guardian, one denied meal, and the entire luxury service system exposed. Forbes, Celeste Morgan, from victim to leading the global service culture reform. In a 3-page feature on Washington Post's social equality section, the video of Celeste speaking just one line in the cabin was shared millions of times. I understand now. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a retaliatory strike. It was a statement that she had seen it all, and she wouldn't let it happen again. Soon after, a social media campaign called Next Year Seat 1A began to spread. Thousands of people shared their stories. Times they had been sidelined, ignored, treated as invisible because of their skin color, gender, or background. And at the end of each post, there was one line: "Because I don't sit in seat 1A, but I deserve respect." Stratus's New York office received over 9,000 emails requesting cultural reform. The External Relations Department in London received documents from 3 major investors demanding an internal seminar on diversity. And CEO Edmonds received a call from the U.S. Secretary of Transportation requesting an official report on the state of corporate culture in the luxury airline industry. Celeste didn't need to appear at any press conferences. She didn't need to fight for the right to speak. Her actions had become the voice. At her hotel by Lake Geneva, Celeste sat alone in a small conference room, not with the media, but with 3 young women of color. She listened to them, those who worked in service, who had been overlooked, who had been deemed out of place, who once thought they couldn't stand up. "We want to learn how to speak up like you," one of them said. Celeste shook her head, her expression stern. "I don't speak up with words. I let the system speak its own truth, and I show it that this time it can't look away." Outside the window, the surface of Lake Lema was still as glass, but deep within the water, the waves were quietly moving, just like the changes that had been set in motion from Seat 1A on a flight Becky Whitmore would never forget. When Stratus Air officially announced the Reform First Class Culture Program, comprehensive mandatory reform of the first-class service culture, with no exceptions. Celeste Morgan had left Geneva 3 days earlier, returning to the U.S. in silence. No press conference, no closing speech, no round of accolades. She didn't need any of that. She had never needed the spotlight to prove her presence. What she left behind wasn't on the front page of newspapers or compliments from fellow CEOs. She left behind a new standard. True power doesn't need to raise its voice. It just needs the right action at the right time. A seemingly small action, pressing the call button, asking about the denied meal, sending a message to her assistant, had forced an entire system to bow its head and correct itself. The behavior that others would call sensitive or overreacting was actually the beginning of a silent revolution in the luxury service industry. And from that day on, when a black passenger, whether a business person, artist, activist, or a single mother flying first class for the first time, boards a plane, they would no longer be seen as a stranger in a world designed not for them, because no one would know who was sitting in Seat 1A. It could be a CEO, an investor, a global tech platform founder, or perhaps simply someone with enough strength not to bow down to discrimination, even when it's hidden beneath a pristine white towel and a standard service smile. At the Morgan Tech office on a weekend afternoon, Celeste sat handwriting a letter, something rare in the age of digital communication. She used blue ink, crisp white paper, and handwriting as neat as the strategic thinking that made her famous. The letter wasn't addressed to Stratus's CEO. It wasn't for the board of directors, not for the media. It was for a 16-year-old girl in Florida who had written to her after reading the Forbes article saying she had been told by her career counselor, "Someone like you should probably stick to the service industry. High tech is beyond you." In the letter, Celeste wrote, "People will think you don't deserve positions they've never seen someone like you in. Don't be angry about that. Just remember, you don't need to make a scene to prove yourself. You just need to show up at the right time and never walk away." And at the end, she wrote the last line. "P.S. Don't forget you have the right to sit in Seat 1A. If they say no, ask them who this system is designed for." Months later, at an international conference on fairness in service industries, a video clip was shown as an introduction. The image of Celeste sitting in first class in front of a cold sandwich tray. No dialogue, just soft background music. The clip was recreated from the passenger camera's perspective, the very clip that had been shared more than 20 million times with the hashtag #Seat1A. Everyone in the room, from hotel chain managers to airline executives, sat in silence. And they understood the issue was never about the food. It was about the service attitude built on prejudice. It was the absence of resistance in the past. And it was the timely presence of a woman they had once overlooked. Celeste boarded the plane for a new business trip that fall, this time from Atlanta to Cape Town as an honored speaker at the Global Leadership Forum. She didn't request any special privileges, didn't mention her name to the ground staff. But when she entered first class, she noticed something she had never seen before. A small nameplate placed in front of Seat 1A with the simple inscription, "Reserved Seat of Change," and at the bottom, 3 words, "We remember you." Celeste smiled lightly, no words needed. She sat down, fastened her seatbelt. The plane began to taxi. The sky was still blue, but now it was wider because there was room for those who were once seen as not belonging. A denied meal, a cold gaze, an action that seemed small had uncovered an entire system of discrimination hidden behind the polished veneer of luxury. Celeste Morgan didn't shout, didn't demand, didn't seek revenge. She simply and quietly made an empire reflect on itself, and from that moment change forever. Her story is a reminder. We don't need to shout to be heard, just the right action at the right time. So what about you? Have you ever been overlooked in a space where you rightfully deserve respect? Will you choose silence or speak up? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story. If this story made you reflect, hit like, share to spread the message, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to catch the next inspiring journeys. Because sometimes all it takes to change an entire system is someone sitting in the right seat.